It's very important for us to be able to tame our tongues as Christians, to not just speak our mind.
But there comes a time when the test comes. Are you with Christ or not? It looks like you are with Christ.
Why is it that you are the only person that can say something people are not comfortable with saying to someone? You don't have to be harsh in your honesty. If the word says, come as you are, it says, come as you are, so you may become in me. Meaning, the first act is hospitality. You accommodate that stranger.
Welcome, and once again, welcome to another episode of our podcast, Your Call. My name is Samantha, and it's great to be back with my fellow co-host, Maps.
Hi, guys.
And today we have our guests, Zweli and Olwethu. Welcome, y'all.
Hi.
Would you mind telling us a bit about yourselves?
Oh my God, there we go.
Already? Why?
I'm always never ready for that because, like a job interview, tell us about yourself. You don't
Oh, is that the vibes we're giving right now? Oh my, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. But I'm Olwethu in full. My name is Olwethu Tando. I go by the surname Shumi. I'm originally from Eastern Cape. And I am 26 years of age, turning 27. Ooh. Yes, I don't fall into that narrative that don't ask a girl her age, because I feel like we need to be honest about the little truths about ourselves. So I'm very much into art in as much as I'm very much into God. So I identify as a Christian more than anything. I love music, but I can't sing.
Same. That's a real struggle.
Yeah, but I don't sound too bad. So people often say I'm lying when I say I can't sing, but I'm vocally wounded. I love reading books. I love fashion. Oh my God, I love fashion because, it's an expression of who I am.
Yeah.
Even in my hairstyles. Yeah. I'm naturally calm. I'm very polite, but I can be sharp. And I like banter. And that would include a bit of dark humor at times,
So this song is actually for you. This is for you.
Sometimes, people think I'm a mean girl, especially when I'm not saying anything, if I'm just quiet. But generally, I'm a nice girl. I'm a cool person because the Christ in me, naturally, I could be a horrible person. But yeah, God plays a huge part in me being a nice person.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hi. My name is Zweli Zulu. I'm originally from KwaZulu-Natal in a town called Ladysmith. It doesn't have much of a good reputation, I know, but I think through Christ's help, as she said as well, I think I'm one of those converted ones from Ladysmith. I think my age now is like 25, so it's not too much, but I'm around 25. So I grew up in KZN, spent first part of my life there 18 years, went to Cape Town, studied there at the University of Cape Town, and I'm currently staying in Woodmead. I'm working there for one of the companies. I would say that what I love is to just work with computers mostly, which is what I do for a living. So, unfortunately, though, I don't have much of a social life because that's kind of demanding. But I'm really glad to be here. I know that we've been trying hard to make this work. I hope you didn't think I didn't really want to do it, but I'm really glad to be here. Really glad to meet the other guests as well.
Oh, that's lovely. So we are here for our 5th episode, Halfway Point, and it is entitled Taming the Tongue. So just before we go into the questions, what really came up in your mind when you first heard the topic?
Okay, go first.
I almost said ladies first.
Like ladies first.
Yeah, sure, for me it was, personal because it's very important for us to be able to tame our tongues as Christians, to not just speak our mind immediately, because there's a thin line between speaking your mind and being disrespectful and hurting someone's feelings. So I know that God had to work with me when it comes to that, because I would just speak my mind, you know, and I would think after speaking good shucks. Yeah, I shouldn't have said
Shouldn't have
that,
said that.
and the damage is done. Now you have to, do damage.
Apologize,
Yeah, you know what I mean? So
everything.
for me, it was like a reminder that remember, in as much as now you think that you are more cautious on what you say, sometimes in situations where you're high in emotions and all, like on my way coming here,
Yeah.
it was literally that, someone was just getting on my nerves and provoking me, and I'm like, kind of taming my tongue.
Hold
let me,
it, hold it,
let
keep
me,
it in.
Let me keep it in. Let me keep it in. So yeah, it was a reminder for me that it's still something that God is helping me with.
I think for me, what came to mind is just the difficulty of it. It seems like something so simple. Oh, tame your tongue. It's your tongue. You always have it with you, and it's always easy for you to think that it's easy to count your words. But I know from personal experience that it's not easy, because there are a lot of things that, as you said, that we say, and afterwards we just live to regret them almost immediately. So I think it's the difficulty of it, and I think it's something that I'm still growing in myself as well. So yeah.
Okay. So have you ever found yourselves in a situation where you speak before you think?
I'll let him go first.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think my example is similar to hers. Road rage. I think there's something
Ooh,
there's something that
so
takes over.
relatable.
There's something that just takes over when you're on the road. That is sort of different from other situations. In easy situations, we can all be cool, calm, and collected, and we can be stable and level-headed. But when a difficult situation shows up, that's where the character pops up. And I think someone was preaching, and they once said that you can be driving to church with all cool music, Christian music, and you're in the spirit, and someone just drives before you in a way that you didn't expect, and all that goes out the window immediately. You're swearing, showing fingers, and all of that. And so for me, that's one of the most tough situations, road rage, where you're always tempted to respond in the energy that you're getting, and it takes a special prayer to be able to resist that and say, no, I will not respond in the way I'm being provoked. So yeah.
You just reminded me of this other movie, Road Rage. Hey,
There's
doesn't
a
end
movie
well.
named Road
Yeah,
Rage.
yeah, it doesn't end
Wow.
well. It doesn't end well. But for me, the carnal mind is so quick to lean unto own understanding.
Yeah.
It's so quick to lean to what you know, the little knowledge that you know, and as a result, you have a loose tongue. For me, that's tested all the time when I am upset. When I'm upset, I would say the most harshest things, and I wouldn't apologize for what I'm saying because I mean it. But
Whoa.
the approach
Is not the
and
best.
yes, the approach and the choice of words would have been poor, which then eliminates what you were trying to get across. So ever since I started praying about it to God to say, you know what, I want us to work on this. I don't want to come across as a person that says, sharp words, and yet your word says we must speak life. So I started reading the book of Proverbs. And on 13:3, it says that the person that guards their tongue preserves their life. Because sometimes you may say something to a wrong person who has no control over their emotions, and then you're being short, or someone does the unthinkable simply because you failed to tame your tongue. So the book of Proverbs I recommend when you are trying to learn how to guard your tongue. So most cases when I'm upset, I keep quiet. I don't say anything until the Holy Spirit guides me how to regulate my feelings, and then I say, you know what, Tammy, I didn't like what you said. I didn't like what you did. Now I'm more calm. I've, regulated my feelings, and I can address the situation. But in a case where, some people will be provoking you, being persistent in doing that, I choose to leave the space because I don't want to act out of character. So those are the two things that are helping me currently. Yeah.
Wow. So, like you both said, like in high situations, like when the pressure is really getting to you, do you guys feel that the words released in those high pressure situations is a true reflection of who that person might be?
I think in a way, yes. I would say yes. And the reason why I'm saying that is, once again, in normal situations where there's no pressure, you can pretend. We can all seem normal, but the true character of a person comes out when the test comes. Let's take the example of Peter in the Bible. For 3.5 years, he walks with Jesus. You would think that, he had overcome his impetuous character of speaking out of turn. But there comes a time when the test comes. Are you with Christ or not? It looks like you were with Christ. And that's the high pressure situation that reveals at that moment that, he hadn't gotten over that weakness that he had. And when he's brought to the test, he fails. And I think in a way we can sometimes sugarcoat it and say, no, that wasn't really me. But I'm not saying that people are defined by their mistakes, but I think it speaks to a certain flaw that still exists in our essence if we still find ourselves falling when it comes to the issue of the tongue.
What are your thoughts?
In between, I want to disagree. I want to agree to a certain degree because in as much as it can be a true reflection of someone's character, but I would like to think it's just highlighting a character flaw, something that needs to be pruned, and that is why it's very important to be receptive of good and bad criticism, because then it allows you to say, I know I am this person, but I know also I have these areas of struggle that I need God to help me with. Because you can easily judge someone by what they're saying, but it's in the moment. So you give a person grace. And maybe after 5 instances and they still respond in that way, you then say, this is a character flaw and this is something someone needs to work on. Because remember, in as much as we are in Christ, we have a lot of examples in the Bible of people who are walking with Christ and yet they had character flaws, meaning we also are to bring them forth to God to say, prune everything that is not of your character so I may be Christ-like. So I'm against the narrative of, cutting people off based on what they said at that time and whatnot.
One mistake.
Yes, let's afford each other grace that, what, she said it when she was angry. And then you see Utai, Zweli has this tendency of saying bad things or harsh things when he's angry. Instead of cutting him off, let him know that, you have this, you're such a good person until you're angry.
Yeah.
Let's
Here's
work
how you
on
can
that.
improve.
Yeah,
Makes
so those are
sense.
my thoughts on that.
Okay. So, how can we improve ourselves from acting on our impulsive thoughts?
Okay.
You can go first.
Okay, I want us to go into James 3. I think it answers as James. I'll read from 7. It says, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is restless, evil, full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. If we go to Proverbs 18:21, it says that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Meaning every time you are to move your lips and utter words, it should be of life. So we must practice speaking life than death, because words are very harsh. That's why you can forgive and act, but to forgive and forget the words that have been said to you, it's very hard. It takes time. That's why God is very serious on that, to say, let us tame our tongues.
Yeah.
So I think every time you think of responding, is it giving life or the opposite? So I think that's a good start of trying to tame our tongues.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the ways is to count each and every one of the words that you speak. And I think by count, I don't mean, number them, but I think just be aware of like what it is you're going to say and be intentional about it every time. And I think sometimes, it does, usually people say, you don't have a filter. So that's the phrase that is used. When you're speaking and you're speaking out of turn, they usually say you don't have a filter. And I think that is a true concept that, every time before you say something, consider the possible consequences. How is it going to land? Is it going to communicate the intended message? Like, what is it going to say? That's the first thing that we can do on our part. But I think that ultimately, I think it's a problem that can only be solved by God within us. It's an issue of transformation of character. And I'm reminded of that verse in John chapter 3, where Christ is speaking to Nicodemus. And Nicodemus asks, what can I do? And he says, you must be born again. There must be sort of a renewing of character. And I think when Christ is living within us, especially as Christians, not to say that, this doesn't apply to anyone else, but as Christians, that's the ultimate power that we can depend on.
So I know, I used to have this friend group, right? And there was this friend who would just speak. And her, defense was that, oh, no, I'm just being honest. That's just me trying to help you. And she wouldn't really care about the consequences that would lead afterwards. For her, it was more so, I'm helping you by being as harsh or being as honest as I am. So how do you advise someone that doesn't even know that they have a loose or sharp tongue?
I think in such a situation, as much as honesty is important, but, it doesn't always have to go hand in hand with being harsh. So there is an element of, okay, I need to tell you difficult truths. You can't always tell someone what they want to hear. In a way, I think that's hurting them, because at some point they'll find out either by you telling them or by reality making known to them what you didn't tell them. So you always have to speak the truth, but I think it doesn't have to be harsh. It doesn't have to go hand in hand with being harsh. And I think in my personal experience, I've found that when you try to sit down and teach people, so say, for example, let me just take an example. When you working, say, with your colleagues or something like that, or you're in school, wherever you are, and someone makes a mistake, say they're underling, there's a way of speaking to them and shouting at them and telling them that, why, and looking at it from your perspective, that this has affected me this way, and, just unloading all of your emotions on them. But there's another way of looking at it from their perspective, that what they were intending to do is not to cause all these consequences, damage. What they were intending to do is do good, but it's just that they didn't know. And in those moments, to teach is much better than to shout and to lay on them something that's not constructive. So I think sometimes we think the more harsh, the more honest. And that's not always the case.
Yeah.
True, yeah. I'm known for a person who's very honest, brutally honest. And like you were saying, I don't have a filter. Oh, she's bland. Oh, let's call Olwethu. She will tell the truth.
Yeah.
And in as much as that can be an advantage, it can also be a disadvantage if you look at it, because why is it that you are the only person that can say something people are not comfortable with saying to someone? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like he was saying that you don't have to be harsh in your honesty. So my advice would be do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. You know, say it to yourself first, and if it sits well, then you can say it to the next person. As God says, I think ultimately that consideration is the highest form of love. You know, God considers our feelings as sinners. He still does it with love and compassion, telling us the truth and the way we should be living. So every time you are going to read the Bible, you find the truths, even the uncomfortable truths about yourself. But when you read it, you feel God's compassion. You don't feel condemnation. So I think that's something that we can learn also, that before you approach a situation. So I've adopted this thing of praying about it, you know. I would let all out my frustration and anger to God to say, you know what, I didn't like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It makes me feel one. And then after that, there's that calm sensation. And now when you are approaching the person, you are no longer approaching the person with your carnal mind, but the Holy Spirit is speaking through you.
Yeah.
And that person, then it speaks life, you know, that person sees they need to work on this. It doesn't break them, but it builds them. So I think that's what we need to consider. You're not sugarcoating things. You still say the truth, but it's in a form of love.
Yeah.
Right. So I actually have a scenario. So a few years ago, there was a young lady who was visiting the Seventh-day Adventist church, right? And this young lady was wearing pants in church. First-time visitor, doesn't know the rules in the SDA church. And next thing she knows is that there's some deaconess behind her who's wrapping her up with a cloth. And a lot of words may have been said without saying anything. So with that said, how does how does not taming the tongue affect the church community?
I think that's a difficult one, because much contention, I think, has arisen in multiple churches because, you know, someone said something in a way that they didn't consider. And I think it's part of the previous question that, you know, the primary goal of some people is to speak truth, which is a noble goal, you know, want to speak truth. But how do you do it? Consider how you do it. Can I just read something for you that it's another quotation that I think, you know, it describes the way Jesus thought about the world and the way he interacted with people. And I think it's instructive. It says, Jesus did not suppress one word of truth, but he uttered it always in love. So there's nothing truthful that he hid, but by the end of that conversation, the people went away thinking, this man really loves me. You know?
Yeah.
They didn't think, oh, he really told me, you know, what I needed to be told. They thought that he really loved them. It says he exercised the greatest tact and thoughtful, kind attention in his intercourse with people. So there was tact in the way he spoke to people. And I think in such situations as the one you've put where, you know, there's a certain rule, someone is breaking it. Once again, you want to consider that person, the posture from which they are coming. That they are not coming from a posture of, I want to break the rules. They're just coming from a posture of ignorance. And you want to leave people with a measure of dignity after you've dealt with them. You know, you don't want to take away, you know, and embarrass them in front of everyone. And that does nothing to advance the cause of truth. That only causes damage in them. So I think the advice that I would give to everyone who rightly wishes to speak the truth, to do, you know, things right in honesty, is be tactful. Consider how it's going to land, and consider how it's going to affect the other person next to you.
Sure. I don't want to say this, but I know for the fact that there were a lot of things that were whispered in that scenario.
Yeah.
We as Christians were very judgmental towards each other. You know, how much more to a stranger now coming into church, not knowing that they shouldn't come to church in trousers, but also it makes us look like an ignorant church that has the knowledge but lacks wisdom. Because if the word says, come as you are, it says, come as you are, so you may become in me. Meaning, the first act is hospitality. You accommodate that stranger. Do not wrap a cloth to someone. It's privacy also. You are invading their privacy, and already they feel uncomfortable now being in church. The attention is now on this person who is not wearing a skirt. You get what I mean? And then now, after welcoming the stranger to worship and all of that, the first impression is that, wow, these are true followers of Christ, because the word says you shall see them by the fruits of the Spirit. The fruits of the Spirit being kindness, goodness, compassion, and all the other that are mentioned. So I feel as a church, it's time we need to put the word into practice. Be the doers of the word, not only the hearers of the word. Because had we been the doers of the word, then we know what to do to a stranger, just like Jesus Christ spread the gospel, not condemning other people. He was followed because of his teachings, his way of teaching, So my advice would be that our acts affect. Right now, we have non-believers who have no interest in believing in God or even following Jesus Christ because of our behavior and our loose tongues.
I think, if I may.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. So I think in addition to what has been said, it's, the primary goal, I think, of the gospel and Christianity is to let people know that God values them. And this is the primary goal that God has to us. That's a primary message he wants to communicate to us. And I think as much as the law is important, as much as other things are important, but I think people need to be left with that message in their minds. And the mistake, I think, that first century Pharisees made was to assume that the more the rules, the closer to God, Now, that's not to say, once again, that the law is not important, but it is to say that they lost sight of what was the goal of the gospel. The gospel was to show care to people. And so they would make all these rules, but then they would pass by that individual. Only the Samaritan was the one who, was taking them and was willing to take care of them. So I think once we lose sight of what the gospel is, which is to save, it's interested in human beings and inviting them, then we begin to act in a way that emphasizes rules at the expense of the human being.
So, just to bounce off of her example, do you feel it would have been a different occurrence or circumstance for her who was like rapped with the Chitenge or the rapper, right? If she was spoken to, but respectfully, but in a manner that is not appropriate. So I'm trying to help you, but the way I'm speaking to you, it comes off as, oh, this person is trying to show that I am a superior or that she is superior to me. Or do you feel that it's more important the manner in which we speak or in which we edify? So I think the way my question is being formed is, for you personally, do you think it's more important the manner in which words are spoken or the words that are spoken?
I'd like to say both, right? In the sense that you may have the right words to say, but your manner of approach is wrong. So you need to be considerate of both your approach and the words, right? The way you choose your words should be considerate of someone's feelings. And the manner of approach, deliverance is very important, because I may be saying a right thing, but my tone is very harsh. My tone is very firm, which then distorts the message that I'm trying to relay to you. There was an Instagram post I came across sometime last year, and till date, it's very profound. Yeah, it's still stuck with me, because that guy was like, the moment matters. What you say may be right, but it may be not the moment to say it.
Oh,
So
timing.
he made an example of, he went to watch his friend do a play, and the play was very horrible. But because she was very excited, she's like, how did I do? And all of that. And then he was like, you did amazing. You're very amazing. I've never seen such a thing. You did good. You did well. Because again, it was not the moment. And then after some time, they were having, lunch. And then he was like, oh, my friend, that was horrible. Yes, I think you can improve in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was well received because it didn't break her. It was building her. But had he said it in that moment, it would have broken her, and maybe she would have thought, oh, she's a bad actor and all of that, and never try it again in her life. So I think both, they matter. Like your deliverance and your choice of words, they do matter.
I think I'd also align with your answer. I think it's both. But if I am to choose one for me, personally, I'd say it's tone. Because I think, there was this comedian who made a joke that certain languages just sound more dangerous than others.
Yeah.
They said, you're speaking Russian, even if you're saying happy birthday, it sounds like, you're scaring me or something. But if you're speaking in other languages, French or whatever, it sounds like, you're inviting me to a party, even if you're threatening.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot that goes into tone, and I think sometimes it's even a matter of personality and gift. I've seen certain people in certain situations say the exact same thing that I was saying, and it's very well received. The people think, that's great, but same exact thing, someone else says it, and it sounds threatening.
Yeah.
So I think that the tone is important because it also, once again, communicates something that, words sometimes cannot communicate, which is, I either care about you or I have considered you or something like that. That the tone is the vehicle for that, but it's not really expressed, articulated in words. And so both are important for me. It's tone is paramount, I'd say.
Okay. So according to Scripture, how can you advise someone on how to speak intentionally?
Sorry.
Okay, sorry, you can go ahead.
Okay. I honestly, there's no other book other than the book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
If you want to build your character, that's your go-to book. And the book of James, they do it very well. And in all, I think it covers all areas of life. At work, how you need to show up. With friends, how you need to speak. As a lady, how you need to, be addressed and all of that. So I would advise the book of Proverbs, the whole book of Proverbs. Never mind where it says you are a fool, because you are a fool if you're failing to tame your tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the book of Proverbs for me,
For me, I think I would say just the Gospels and specifically Christ, just how he went about his life. There are multiple occasions where people are trying to catch Christ saying something wrong, but they failed in almost all of them. And I think it was because he was always just careful about how he spoke. Another story that strikes me in the Bible is the story of Nathan the prophet, the one who was speaking to David. Yeah. So he was sent to deliver bad news to David that, he would be punished by God, and there are a lot of punishments that would come to him because of the sins that he had committed. And can imagine the situation he was in. He has to speak to a king. The king has his life in his hands. David could command and Nathan could be killed. And I like the strategy. It was sort of slick that he used, but it was something that I think we can learn a lot from, which is he told him a parable, and then he made him speak his own verdict. So the verdict was that he would be punished, but he puts it to him and says, think about this. A man has, there was one man who had many sheep, was rich, was wealthy, another man who had only one sheep. The one man was rich. When guests came to him, he went over to the one man who was poor. He takes his sheep, he slaughters it, and he uses it to feed the guests. So what should be done to that man? And this is an analogy. I mean, David doesn't realize this, but this is an analogy to the fact that David has taken Uriah's wife while he had many other wives. And Nathan puts this to him. He says to him, what do you think should be done to this man? And David says, this man should be killed and his house should be burned. And then he takes it back to him and says, you are that man. You know? So I think this for me is a masterclass in communication. He could have went to him and said, you deserve to die, you deserve to. And he did deserve to die because of that sin. But he makes him say that himself. He makes him realize that. And I think that's one of the ways that we can communicate, where if you feel that you've been, there's something hard that you have to communicate with someone, you can just make it clear to them and they can get to that conclusion themselves. So that's one of the stories that's instructive to me.
If I may add to that, you're reminding me of Moses, the journey of Moses, And he was very honest, Moses. He was very honest with God. Yeah. He says to God, I don't know how to speak, I'm not eloquent. What if they don't listen to me?
Yeah.
And then God says that, is it not I that gave you the mouth?
Amen.
I will teach you what to say. So I feel when you find yourself in a position where you don't know what to say and how to say it and how it's going to land to the next person, you have every right to turn to God and say, I don't know what to say. And he will teach you what to say.
So I'm going to ask two questions here, right? First one, how would you define or explain your relationship with Christ or with God?
I didn't know we were asking difficult questions.
Is it difficult?
I think it's clear it's easy to understand, but it's very difficult to gauge your relationship with Christ. Simply because we always feel like we're falling short, and I think that's where I am at. That you always feel that you're not living up to other sense, but I think it's that assurance that Christ always gives you, which is always waiting to accept you whenever you come back to him. So I think for me, my relationship with Christ, I think it is good at this moment, but it could be better. So that's how I'd characterize it.
Okay.
For me, my relationship with God, I would refer it to the book of Hosea, where God instructs a prophet to marry a prostitute, who is constantly sleeping with other husbands. Yeah. And God says to the prophet, in her nakedness, go and cover her. So I feel there are times and seasons in my life where I've been Goma, and God had to be the prophet and cover me in my nakedness, which is sin. So if you read the entire book, you see that God, there are chapters where God is expressing his wrath towards the Israel, or rather what Goma is doing. And over time, the same God that is angry at me is the same God that chases after me, that pursues me to say, come back to me. I'm the only husband that can love you the way you need to be loved. So for me, currently I am where I've returned back to my original husband, and I'm just reconsidering my ways. It's not perfect, but it's a beautiful walk because he does it so well. He does it with love and compassion. He doesn't make me feel like a sinner, though I am. But in him, I'm slowly becoming Christ-like. His grace is always sufficient for me, because even in moments where I feel like I'm undeserving, but he says, you are mine. I've called you by my name. We will work on this together. So I've gotten to a point where God is my best friend. I can tell him anything that I feel, anything that is in my thoughts, everything, because growing up, God is made to be seen as this person you can only go to with, formalities and all of that. Yeah. But when you're growing in spiritual life, you get to see that actually when Jesus Christ was telling the disciples how, or rather teaching them how to pray, he said, you say our Father. He didn't say you say our God, because he wanted us to see that we have this father and daughter or father and son relationship with God. So technically in your home, you know that your father loves you. Even when he's reprimanding you, you know that it's out of love and not of hate. So that's where I'm at with God.
All right. So how do you explain your relationship with Christ to someone who has had a bad reputation or a bad past with Christianity, or to someone with a different religion? How do you tame your tongue or speak to them about God without offending them?
I would say, first thing, find common ground. I think, and that's true not just when you speak about Christianity to someone who's non-Christian or of a different religion, but in any situation where you're trying to mend a difference. Let's begin where we agree, right? And let's accept that as the common premise.
Yeah.
And then try to work our way to what we don't agree about. That's the first thing. And then the other thing is what we usually refer to as the method that Christ used, where he ministered to people's needs, and then after that, he bade them follow me. And I think there's nothing more strong in testimony than ministering to someone's needs or showing to someone that you care about them. There's no testimony that can, gainsay that. I think that's the best way of putting it, that once someone knows practically that your faith is correct and it's working for me, then there's nothing else, there's no other argument that can convince them otherwise. That individual who was healed by Christ, who had been blind, there was a lot of argument about whether Christ is the Messiah or not, or whether we should be accepted or not. And there was a lot of commotion, and there was a lot of discussion. People were not sure. It wasn't clear. There were a lot of opinions. But once Christ had healed him and had opened his eyes, the argument was, it was rested for him. The evidence was enough. Even his parents didn't believe. They were called before some of the church leaders, and they were asked about their belief. They said they don't know. But for him, it was clear, right, that Christ is the way. And so I think for people who do not believe, and I have encountered many people who don't believe in my life, and I mean that's quite common. But I'd say the way that I usually deal with it is first to try to find common ground. An example I would give is I had a friend in university who we were studying together, and he was a bit of I'd say he was a genius. He's just one of those smart people. And he was very scientifically minded, and he had that worldview of, there's no God, there's nothing. We are all, it's a big bang and evolution and all of those things, and he had that mindset. But I think through our discussions, and unfortunately still not a Christian yet, but through our discussions, it slowly became clear to him that through finding common ground first, that, we need to be evidence-based in our assumptions. So he would then see that it's very difficult to get to the conclusion that the world just came out of nothing, that the world just, it does testify of a creator, and, it became difficult for him to get out of that. And it was just finding that common ground that, okay, we both believe in this, we both see it, but here's where there's divergence. And I think if our conversations maybe had continued, he would be a Christian today. And then if I had done something, for example, that would have showed him that, I don't care about him or something like that, then that would have not been Zweli Zulu is a person who's not caring. That would have been Christians don't care. And I think we have as Christians that duty to protect the name of Christianity. So that's how I usually go about it. That's how I usually go about it when I speak to people who are not believers.
True. Hey, it's very important to understand that we are the ambassadors of Christ, and how we carry ourselves or even show up to the world reflects who Christ is, unfortunately. That's why if someone from SDA is caught up doing something worldly or something that the church does not align with, they will not say so and so. They will say, I'm a Sabbath.
Adventist.
Yes,
Yeah.
So that's one thing that we need to know, that in as much as it's an individual act, we fall into the same trap. When someone is referring to SDAs, now they're referring to SDAs as a whole,
Yeah.
not particularly that one person. So number one, your character should be the main convincing factor to non-believers. Your character should make non-believers question their disbelief in God. That how is she so loving? How is she so caring? How does she get to mold herself even in situations that, you can easily act out of character, or you can panic and whatnot. But also in the Bible, it says that you must love yourself. Sorry, you must love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yeah.
That God didn't say love your neighbor so that you can learn to love yourself. No, God says love your neighbor as you love yourself, meaning you need to love yourself in order to be able to love the next person. So it's not limited to Christian. When the word says above all things, love, we are brought here to learn how to love. You know what I mean? So first things first, you step out of religion, because religion is forever controversial. So you step out of religion, you understand, put yourself in this person's shoes, because most of the time they are wounded when they were still in the body of Christ, not outside. You get to understand their experience, that, okay, this is how you encountered Christ or, the church, but that's not God. It's not a Christ per se, So you don't impose your beliefs on the next person. You try and understand where they're coming from and share the same sentiments to say, oh, I understand. Even as you get to a point where you feel like God has failed you.
Yeah.
You get to a point where you don't see the word manifesting in your life, and people are like, if this God is real, then why is your life like this? And you don't have the answers, but you don't personalize it. It's never personal. We are quick to personalize it, and then you want to defend God, you want to defend your faith, and you forget now the end goal, which is bringing this person to Christ. I'll make an example. Last year, I was engaging with one of my colleagues. As we're engaging, so he does voiceover gigs and all of that.
Oh, okay.
So I am asking him that, okay, why don't you pursue more of that? And then he's like, hey, this job that we are doing, can just swallow you, and, it controls what you do and what you can't do with your life and all of that. And before I could say there's only one master, I asked and said, do you believe in God? And then he's like, no, but I'm a pastor's kid,
Oh, PK.
Yes. And then he said something very profound that, faith is not something that you can inherit, unfortunately. I can't hotspot that from my dad, And I was like, the reason why I was asking if you do believe in God is because I was about to say there's only one master. You can't serve two masters. When you serve this one master, all these other things are added, meaning your passion will be added because you are seeking the kingdom of God. And then he's like, okay, thank you actually for being considerate of how I would have felt if you immediately said, there's only one master, and whatnot. And then you won't believe what happened after that. I think a weekend passed, if not a week. And then he comes to me and then he's like, after that conversation we had, in the same weekend, I had a conversation with my girlfriend, and we are both not saved and all of that. So I was like, someone said this thing to me. And then later on, I come across a snippet on TikTok talking about Christianity and being born again and all of that. And then he's like, I gave my life to Christ.
Wow.
And I didn't, because, it was just such a random conversation.
Yeah.
And it was not even, evangelizing or, a Christian talk. We're just talking about passions and all of that. And then it dawned to me that, how you bring someone to Christ, sometimes you don't have to use scriptures. Sometimes you don't have to debate about it. Sometimes you don't have to be defensive about it. By just understanding and allowing to agree, even though you disagree, but you just agreeing, and allow the Holy Spirit to do the rest of the work. You have planted a seed, and God can work with that, because if that person is good soil, then the word will manifest in their life.
I think, sorry to stop you. I think in addition just to what was said there, there's something to be said for us as Christians, who are in the faith, for us to ensure that we don't hurt other people. But there's also something to be said to the person who is hurt. And I think this might sound cruel, but it's to put a reality check in their expectations. When we come to church, I think we should not expect perfect people. I don't. Now, that's not to say that I'm justifying the Christians who may have hurt that person, but I think there's something to be said for this fact that wherever you go, workplace, church, school, family, there'll always be someone who you find that hurts you, and the best way to preserve yourself from that, as much as we should adjust the community, and we should. But the best way to preserve yourself from that is to ensure that you're coming to church for a strong relationship with God. And so that if that relationship is strong, it doesn't depend, so it doesn't turn so much on, I saw so-and-so gossiping about me. As much as that should not happen. And we as Christians should make sure it doesn't happen. But we as individuals as well should know that if we're expecting a faultless church, we'll never go to church. And I think there's something to be said for that as well.
Yeah.
All right. So has your manner of speech ever ruined your relationships?
Is that even a question?
It's obviously yes.
Yeah,
it's
very
yes.
much obvious.
And I think it's that thing of not counting your words, There are instances where anger takes over, just
the
reason.
moment.
Yeah, it just takes over the moment, and you wanna tell the person, you wanna give them, a piece of your mind. That's what you wanna give them a piece of your mind. But I think that has happened to me as well, where I go back and I think, hey, I won't give specific examples, but you go back and you think, I could have said that better, And sometimes it feels good, if we can just be honest, to be able to let out that anger. But it feels good only for that moment. And you live to regret it, So I think as much as it does feel good, but, you just have to train yourself to, as we're saying, tame your tongue. So that as time continues, you learn to inhibit your... And the good thing about being able to tame your tongue is you reap the rewards later, In my personal relationships, there's a lot of conflict that has been avoided by just saying a certain phrase in a different way than I would have said it if I was angry. And you find that, there's, people become more conciliatory. And I think something else that I've learned is that there's another phrase that I've read in one of my favorite books. It says, only by love is love awakened. It cannot be compelled. It cannot be forced. There's no other way of getting to it. It's only by depositing it that you find it resurrected in someone else as well. And that's true as well of anger, or of not anger in this case, but peace and, just a conciliatory relationship. That people always respond in the way you come to them, If you come to a certain situation with anger, the person is, defensive almost immediately. But you find that if you're able to put that down, resist that, and go to them with controlled emotions, then you find yourself in a better place. There's just something else that I want to read that I had prepared. It says, strength of character consists of two things: power of will and power of self-control. Many youth mistake strong, uncontrolled passion for strength of character. But the truth is that he who is mastered by his own passions is a weak man. And I think that's true. I mean, mostly for us as guys, sometimes being, aggressive and, I'm going to show them. It's considered as a form of strength. But she says, that is the peak of weakness, because at that moment you are being mastered by your passions. And I think the ability to resist that and say, let's think about things logically. Let's think about things reasonably. Let's take a reasonable path that will benefit us in the long term. You'll find a lot of peace in your relationships. And I think I've tried to implement that in my relationships, and I think it works very well. And this is not just, relationships with a partner, but it's relationships with family, friends, everywhere. You find that this is a good regulating mechanism that brings peace wherever you go.
I'm here sitting thinking that the reason why maybe my relationships are not going well because of my tongue. Man, and yes, many good relationships can end simply because you can't tame your tongue, And I remember with my ex then at the time, he would say that, I don't have a way of speaking. I just drop bombs, And then I would be like, oh, he's so hypersensitive, He takes things personal. Relax, I'm joking, But if I look at it, would I take the same joke, And no. And it takes, a lot of those instances where it's not just one person who's saying that, but a lot of people are saying that. And you're like, no, this is something that I need to work on. You can't just speak however, say things however, or even speak your mind as we like to glamorize it. But you must take an instance or reflect and think, if he was to say the same thing to me, how was it going to land? Immediately you'd be boiling, or you think that he doesn't consider your feelings and whatnot. I then later on, God does it very, he puts it vividly, to say, if you were to be this person, these are the results that you get. As he was saying that sometimes it's not just you saying things, but putting into practice a healthy mechanism which brings forth peace. There was a time where I had a problem with being late, The lateness was not the problem, but communicating was the problem. I would panic and think, if I communicate, he's probably going to get more angry. But the reason why he's getting more angry, it's because I am not communicating. You know what I mean? And then most of the time I'd find a person angry and all of that. And I'd be like, oh my God, this is what I was avoiding. But it was not registering in my mind that, effective communicate that it seems like I'll be a little bit later. And on your way there, you must communicate to let the person know that I am still coming, Also in the way that you are saying it, you're not making the other person look like a fool waiting for you, But then this other time, it was the same thing. I was practicing effective communication, but I still have that anxiety based on past experiences where I'd find a person angry and whatnot, and I wouldn't know what to do in that situation. So I find a person, and then they're like, oh, you arrived, and their mood has not changed.
Yeah.
They are fine. And I was very shocked. And I'm like, it's not what he didn't say. It's how, he approached the situation. And I was like, sure. Same thing with taming your tongue. This is the reaction you'll get from the next person, that how come she's saying such in a situation that requires her to say the opposite? You make the next person have an entire total experience, but also they learn from you that, okay, this is what happens when you speak this way, and this is what happens when you speak that way. So like he was saying that a lot of conflicts, you get to avoid them if you know how to speak. If you don't know what to say,
Let it be.
don't say it. Especially as women, because we're already painted as, people with
emotional, big times,
and we don't like this. So, and I've told myself that I will not be that lady that no. I will read the situation, and when I can collectively articulate myself, I can
That's when
address
it'll
the
be.
situation. Yeah.
Right. Seems we have come to the end of our episode, guys. Olwethu, Zweli, thank you so much for being on this episode with us. I hope your experience was enjoyable. I hope you were comfortable. Is there anything you'd like to share?
No. Just thank you for coming through, guys.
Thank you for having
Thank you
us.
for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Callers, we will see you again in our next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.